Picture this: rotting wooden tombs floating in the Thames, packed with desperate men chained in their own filth, their screams swallowed by the river fog while London's finest sipped tea just miles away. These weren't shipwrecks. They were deliberate. The British Empire, in all its supposed glory, had discovered something brilliantly cost-effective. Why build prisons when you can just let men rot alive on stripped warships, saving the taxpayers a fortune while slowly killing the condemned in plain sight? Welcome to the prison hulks, where the punishment wasn't just confinement, it was orchestrated decomposition, and the British government perfected it for nearly a century. When the American colonies told Britain to shove off in 1776, they weren't just rejecting tea taxes and tyranny. They were also refusing to be England's dumping ground for convicts. For decades, Britain had been shipping its thieves, debtors, and troublemakers across the Atlantic, a tidy arrangement that kept London's streets clean and its prisons empty. But independence ruined that little scheme, and suddenly Parliament faced a crisis. Jails overflowing with wretches who had nowhere to go. The solution they devised wasn't merciful or progressive. It was pragmatic in the cruelest sense. In 1776, the same year Americans declared freedom, Britain passed the Criminal Law Act, better known as the Hulks Act, authorizing the use of decommissioned naval vessels as floating prisons. The government promised it was temporary, a stopgap measure, until they figured out something better. That lie lasted 80 years. The ships chosen for this honor were the discarded husks of Britain's once proud Royal Navy, vessels that had seen battle and glory, now stripped of their sails, their masts, their dignity. They were moored along the Thames near Woolwich and Deptford, at Portsmouth, at Chatham, their hulls rotting in the brackish water, their decks sealed shut. These weren't prisons in any humane sense. They were warehouses for the condemned, floating coffins anchored in the fog, where the sounds of suffering couldn't quite reach polite society. The men crammed into these hulks weren't all murderers or rapists. Most were petty criminals, men whose crimes would barely register today. Steal a handkerchief? 5 years on the hulks. Poach a rabbit to feed your starving children? 7 years in chains. Owe money you couldn't repay. Straight to the ship, no trial, no appeal, just iron shackles and the stench of despair. The authorities didn't care about proportionality. They cared about efficiency. And nothing was more efficient than packing hundreds of men into the bowels of a rotting warship and forgetting they existed. Below deck, the convicts lived in conditions that would horrify even the most hardened criminal today. They were shackled together in wooden cells barely large enough to lie down in, the air so thick with the reek of unwashed bodies, human waste, and stagnant river water that breathing itself became a punishment. Oil lamps flickered weakly against blackened walls, casting shadows that danced like demons. The prisoners slept on bare planks, sometimes lying in their own excrement, sometimes in someone else's. Rats scurried freely, fat and fearless, feasting on whatever scraps the men couldn't protect. Disease was inevitable. Typhus, tuberculosis, dysentery, they swept through the hulks like wildfire, killing more men than the lash or the labor ever could. The authorities called typhus jail fever, as if naming it something quaint could sanitize the horror of watching men die in agony there. Bodies convulsing, their skin burning with fever, their final moments spent shackled to a corpse that hadn't been removed yet because the guards could not be bothered. The Justitia, moored at Woolwich since 1776, became one of the most infamous hulks. An inspection in 1801 found over 300 men crammed aboard, many of them sick, many dying, all of them existing in a state of suspended death. The ship was infested with vermin, its hold reeking of rot and despair. Convicts lay inches apart, their bodies pressed together in the darkness, their breath mingling in the foul air. Some men went mad. Others simply gave up, lying still until death claimed them. The guards didn't intervene. Why would they? Dead men didn't eat, didn't complain, didn't cost the crown anything. Every morning, the convicts were awakened before dawn, not gently, but with the clang of chains and the shouts of overseers who treated them like livestock. There was no appeal, no hope of clemency. To be sentenced to the hulks was to be erased from society, buried alive while the world moved on above. The ships were out of sight, moored in the industrial stretches of the Thames, where the fog was thickest and the public rarely ventured. The British government preferred it that way. The hulks were cheap, convenient, and most importantly, invisible. Parliament could congratulate itself on solving the prison crisis without acknowledging the thousands of men it had condemned to a slow, torturous death. And the public? They didn't care. These were criminals, after all. They deserved what they got. Or so the thinking went. But the truth was darker. The hulks weren't just about punishment. They were about control, about demonstrating the state's power to destroy anyone it deemed unworthy. The men shackled below deck weren't just criminals. They were warnings, living examples of what happened when you stepped out of line in His Majesty's empire. Discipline on the hulks wasn't about rehabilitation. It was about terror. The lash ruled everything, and the men who wielded it knew no mercy. A prisoner could be flogged for almost anything: speaking out of turn, moving too slowly, looking at a guard the wrong way, even for the crime of exhaustion. The cat-o'-nine tails, that lovely little instrument of British naval tradition, was the preferred tool. 9 cords, each knotted at the end, each knot designed to tear flesh from bone with surgical precision. The man sentenced to flogging was dragged to the ship's grating, his arms stretched and bound, his back exposed to the assembled prisoners who were forced to watch. The boatswain's mate, usually a former sailor who'd grown accustomed to violence, raised the whip and brought it down with practiced efficiency. The sound was distinct, a sharp crack followed by the wet slap of leather meeting flesh, and the inevitable scream. Infection was guaranteed. The damp, filthy air of the lower decks ensured that every wound festered, turning septic within days. Men who survived their flogging often died weeks later from gangrene or blood poisoning, their bodies slowly rotting from the inside out. The frequency of these punishments was staggering. Ship logs from the late 18th and early 19th centuries reveal that some men were flogged 20, 30, even 50 times in a single year. One man was flogged for spilling his gruel, another for coughing during inspection. The authorities justified this brutality with cold bureaucratic logic. They claimed the convicts were inherently corrupt, morally bankrupt creatures who required constant coercion to prevent rebellion. Fear, they believed, was the only language these men understood, and so fear became policy, ritualized and recorded in meticulous detail. Every punishment was entered into the ship's log: date, name, offense, number of lashes. The Empire kept excellent records of its cruelty. A surgeon was always present during floggings, not to provide mercy, but to ensure the prisoner survived. His job wasn't to heal. It was to make sure the man lived long enough to be punished again. If a prisoner collapsed or lost consciousness, the surgeon would intervene, reviving him so the flogging could continue. This wasn't medicine. It was torture dressed in professional attire. Some prisoners, impossibly, refused to break. The authorities had a solution for that too: solitary confinement in the ship's hold, chained in absolute darkness, denied food and water, except for minimal rations, designed to keep a man alive but perpetually weak. Days turned into weeks. Some men emerged from solitary confinement broken beyond repair. Others never emerged at all. But physical punishment was only half the horror. Every morning, the convicts were herded from the darkness below deck, their ankles shackled, their bodies weakened by disease and malnutrition, and marched ashore to perform backbreaking labor for the state. This wasn't symbolic work. These men built the infrastructure of empire, hauling timber, breaking stone, dredging the Thames in freezing, sewage-filled water. They remained locked around ankles and wrists, forcing prisoners to learn how to move, how to lift, how to survive while dragging pounds of metal with every step. Many prisoners were sent to the naval dockyards at Woolwich, Portsmouth, and Chatham, where they hauled massive ship timbers through freezing mud, their bodies bent double under the weight. Others were assigned to dredging operations, wading chest-deep into the Thames' filthy water, using hand tools to clear channels for the Royal Navy. The river was thick with sewage, industrial waste, and God knows what else. Men breathed it in, swallowed it accidentally, felt it seep into every cut and wound on their bodies. Infections were rampant. Drownings were common. No one kept count. Work continued in all weather. Winter frost turned the fetters into instruments of agony, burning against frozen skin, sometimes freezing to flesh. Summer heat made the iron unbearable, searing skin and causing festering burns. Guards patrolled with muskets and whips, barking orders, punishing hesitation. Any prisoner who paused, who stumbled, who dared to rest even for a moment, was flogged on the spot and ordered back to work immediately. There was no mercy, no compassion, only the relentless rhythm of labor and punishment. The promise of early release existed in theory. Good behavior, defined as absolute submission and tireless work, could supposedly shorten a sentence. But this was a cruel joke. Their labor left its mark across England's naval cities. The dry docks at Portsmouth, the fortified yards at Chatham, the rope walks and timber basins, all bore the imprint of convict hands, but no monument commemorates them. No plaque bears their names. At dusk, the surviving prisoners were marched back aboard the hulk, but there was no relief waiting. Only the stench of the hold, the sound of rats, the ache of fresh wounds, and the certainty that tomorrow would bring the same suffering. The hulks ground men down methodically, day after day, year after year, until death or transportation finally released them. This was Britain's answer to its prison crisis. Not reform, not rehabilitation, but slow, profitable destruction. The empire fed on the labor of the condemned while erasing their humanity. John Howard, the prison reformer, visited these ships in 1777 and wrote that they were crowded, offensive, and destructive. He was being polite. The prison hulks were floating hells, state-sanctioned torture chambers that operated for nearly 80 years, and Britain congratulated itself for its efficiency the entire time.